at the Q&A part that we have at the end. On behalf of the NAP Global Network, again, I'm really excited to be presenting and discussing this research today with you. A report that was produced by Slack and Trust in partnership with the NAP Global Network and with the generous support of the Government of Ireland. The NAP Global Network has been supporting countries for now over a decade in advancing their NAP processes and accelerate adaptation efforts. And as we're seeing that more and more countries have NAP processes in place and are moving from planning to implementing them, integrating adaptation into different levels and sectors of government becomes crucial. Because while adaptation planning is a national-driven effort, the action of adaptation is often local and needs to be local. At the same time, we also notice that human mobility, either as a consequence of climate impacts and also as a means of adaptation, is increasingly on countries' agendas. So we were therefore very happy when Slack and Trust approached us last year to team up for this research that looks at how countries are addressing the potentials and also the challenges of human mobility as part of their national and subnational adaptation frameworks. So we hope that today, with the research that's shared and with the insights and lessons that we hear from the speakers, that this will help to break down some of these big concepts that we often talk about and make them a bit more tangible, like addressing human mobility in the context of climate change or mainstreaming adaptation across different levels of governance. So we hope that these concrete examples can provide some entry points of what can be done to execute adaptation measures that consider the potential and the challenges of human mobility. We have a stellar panel here today, as you see on the slide. Before I introduce them, I'll hand over the word to our co-host from Slack and Trust, Dennis Mombacher, for some opening remarks from your side as well.
Thank you very much, Katharina, and it's great to see so many people joining. Welcome everybody from my side as well. My name is Dennis Mombauer. I work for Slack and Trust as Director of Research and Knowledge Management, and we are very happy to have this webinar here today and be able to present some of the findings from this research, which we carried out over the last months with the support from NAP Global Network, both like as a general support, but I think also from the expertise that they have brought in that has really helped to make this a very concrete and useful report. And I would also like to thank from our side the Government of Ireland for supporting this work. And yeah, we are a non-profit think tank. We try to operate at the interface between evidence and policy and make evidence useful for policy processes, both at the national level and in the multilateral process. So national adaptation plans are very good, I think, centerpiece for this because they are sitting at the national level, but they have very concrete implications for what's happening below the national level, at the subnational and local level. But they're also very much tied to the global process, the UNFCCC negotiations and what is happening there. So since now countries have started implementing the NAPs, many countries had already have a NAP for several years or even like a decade. And others are in the process of operationalizing the NAPs. I think it was really timely to look at how mobility can be incorporated at the subnational and local level. And I'm looking forward to presenting some of the findings from the report. So again, thank you very much to the NAP Global Network, our partners in this. Thank you to the Government of Ireland for supporting this work. And thank you all for joining today. And with that, I hand over back to Katharina to lead us through the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Dennis. I'll now introduce our speakers. From the NAP Global Network, we have Mauricio Luna Rodriguez, who's our Senior Policy Advisor on Climate Change Adaptation Governance and our in-house expert in integrating adaptation across different levels of government. He will set the stage for our discussion by introducing and framing the NAP process, vertical integration, and human mobility in it. I'm very happy to have you. We'll then hear from Dennis Mombauer, who just introduced himself, about the highlights from the research report. And I trust we can maybe also put a link in the chat already so that people can reach out as it's launched and online as of this week. We're then very fortunate to have two guest speakers from the case country studies that we included in this research. We have one Sri Lanka's Director of the Climate Change Secretariat from the Ministry of Environment, and operational focal point to the UNFCCC, Mr. Lil Radini. We hope that he can join us in a bit. Very much involved in other commitments, as everybody is very busy, but very happy to have him on board. As well as Senegal's GCF NAP Readiness Project Coordinator and NAP Technical Specialist, currently at UNDP, Mr. Gabriel Pierre Ndaye. Very happy to have you as well, and we're looking very much forward to your interventions. Finally, we have ample room for Q&A and hopefully very interactive discussion, so please don't be shy. You can write your questions at any time in the chat or pose your questions in person when we get to that discussion part. So now I'm done talking, and Mauricio, over to you.
Thank you very much, Katarina, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening for all of you who join us in this webinar. So, as you can see here on the slide, as it was mentioned, I'm going to provide a quick framing presentation on the concepts of vertical integration and human mobility in the NAP processes as a way to introduce the findings of this research. If we can go to the next slide, please. So for those of you who are not familiar with the work of the NAP Global Network, our goal is to enhance national adaptation planning and action in the Global South. We receive funds from multiple funders, as you can see here on the slide. And our work is based on 3 pillars. One pillar is national level action. Under this one, we have supported 73 countries that have received direct technical support of the network. The pillar that you can see here in the middle of the slide, the second one is South-South peer learning. Under this pillar, we have supported over 800 people from more than 800 countries who have participated in our peer learning events. Maybe some of you have taken part in one of our peer learning events. And to your right, you can see our third pillar, which is knowledge products. Under this one, we have generated more than 350 knowledge products. If you go to our website, you can find these products, and we pretty much cover everything under the sun in connection to the NAP process. So if we can go to the next one, please. For those who are new to the NAP process, this slide summarizes the different phases, which you can see in this image on your left, from impact, vulnerability, and risk assessments to the planning process, the implementation, and the monitoring, evaluation, and learning. In the middle of this image, you can see some of the enabling factors, which I'm going to read to you. And these ones have been identified by the network over the course of the years, over the last 10 years, supporting countries in their NAP processes. Leadership is one of those, different institutional arrangements that connect different levels and different sectors, engagement of different actors, data, knowledge, and communications, skills and capacities, and financing. In a nutshell, through these processes, we identified and addressed medium and long-term priorities for adaptation to climate change. And this is the main support that we provide to countries. As it was mentioned, assessing risk, identifying those main adaptation options, implementing those options, tracking, measuring progress, and learning. The idea is to put the systems and capacities to make this part of a regular development planning and budgeting more than a standalone process. If we can go to the next one, please. So what are the expected outcomes of the NAP process? First is to articulate the adaptation priorities at the national level, to pretty much state a clear pathway towards addressing these priorities for adaptation, to enhance coordination on climate adaptation among different actors, sectors, and levels of governance, and to accelerate strategic investments, with the ultimate goal of reducing the country's vulnerability and increased resilience to the impacts of climate change in the medium and long term. If we can go to the next one, please. And this is a step of play of NAT processes in developing countries. You can see here to your left that out of 154 developing countries across the world, the great majority, 143, have a NAT process underway, which is great news. In the middle of the slide, you can see that out of these 154 countries, 108 have accessed the initial 3 million window of the GCF readiness program. And to your right, you can see that the number of NAP documents that have been submitted to the UNFCCC have been increasing over the last years. Nowadays, 63 developing countries have formally submitted the NAP document to the UNFCCC platform. Out of those 63, 22 countries are least developed, and 13 are small island development states, which, as we all know, are some of the most vulnerable to climate impacts. And you can find a lot of this information in our database, NAP Trends. Thank you. So if we go back to the previous slide, excellent. So moving to this one, thank you. Moving to what do we understand as vertical integration in a NAT process, which is a key component, some of the findings of human mobility in the research that is being launched today. So this vertical integration is the practice of creating intentional and strategic linkages between national and subnational governance levels in the whole adaptation cycle, including climate change risk assessment, adaptation planning, implementation, and MEL, or monitoring, evaluation, and learning. If we can move to the next slide. And here are some stats from our database, NAP Trends, which you can find through our website, or you can just Google directly in your browser. So many countries are establishing and strengthening mechanisms for vertical integration. And as you can see, this is pretty prominent on the analysis of our NAP Trends database. For example, 100% of NAPs mention subnational actors, as well as 100% of NAP documents mention local or community action, which is very good news. Also, 82% of NAP documents mention mechanisms for vertical integration. And on this note, we are working on a study that is analyzing these different mechanisms for multi-level governance that are mentioned in the NAP documents, and that will be available in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. In the meanwhile, if you would like to read more about how different levels of governance are integrated in the NAT process, you can access our report, which is called Progress on Vertical Integration in National Adaptation Plan Processes, which you can as well find on our website. So if we can move to the next one. So we also wanted to bring to you a couple of examples of the support that the network has provided on vertical integration and human mobility. So the first one is for the country of Fiji, where the NAP Global Network has provided support to the government in the NAT process since 2017. And this included the development of Fiji's first NAP document, which was launched in 2018. And this document was developed through a participatory process that identified 160 adaptation priorities, including to strengthen human mobility in subnational development planning. As you can imagine, this is a top priority for Fiji. If we can move to the next. Another example of support is the one we provided more recently to Malawi. The network supported the government in 2023 and 2024 in integrating human mobility in the country's NAP process. Some of the key messages of the final report, human mobility, is that this one should be integrated into Malawi's NAP process to be inclusive of vulnerable communities, to prevent losses and damages, and to align adaptation with disaster risk management policies, in particular to facilitate financial flows. So Malawi's NAP document is expected to be completed this year using the GCF window, which is implemented by UNEP, and is yet to be confirmed if how human mobility is going to be integrated. But in the meanwhile, if you would like to learn more, you can access the policy brief that you can see here on the slide. If we can move to the next one. So this is it from me. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it back to our colleagues.
Great. Thank you so much, Mauricio, for this overview of the NAP process and the different elements that we will now speak more to with a concrete presentation of the research from Slack and Trust. So Dennis, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I will, thank you very much, Mauricio, for this wonderful introduction to the NAP process. I think this is really helpful, and also to the different governance levels and how they connect. So I will try to present a bit some of the key findings of this research report, and maybe tell a bit about what we have done for this research, and also what we are hoping to do. Before we go into the research report itself, I would like to give a bit of a framing. Next slide, please. On human mobility in NAPs. So when we talk about human mobility, this is a quite broad term. So under the UNFCCC, usually it refers to migration, displacement, and planned relocation. There's also a sizable emerging debate around immobility, which can either be voluntary, which is often tied to things like the right to remain and the agency of not moving, or involuntary, trapped populations of people not having the resources or the means to move. And we have done an analysis of how this is currently incorporated into NAPs. As Mauricio said, there are 63 multi-sectoral NAPs that have been submitted by developing country parties as of May, I think. And out of these, 83% mention climate-related mobility in some way, often just as a reference that migrants or displaced people are vulnerable to climate impacts, or that climate impacts result in displacement. And then 62%, almost 2/3, they have concrete actions, provisions, or commitments to address human mobility in some form. So maybe something related to data collection, could be to planning and projections, but there are also three main types of actions to directly address it. One is looking at preventing mobility, seeing it as a form of loss and damage, something to be prevented. One is to kind of protect those who are moving. So there's accepting that there is mobility, but making sure that those who are on the move have adequate protection. And then the third one is looking at mobility as adaptation strategy and a potential contributor to development and adaptation. And here you can see the breakdown among migration, displacement, and planned relocation. We haven't done a breakdown for immobility because it is a bit difficult to properly capture, and it's also an emerging area of research. Next slide, please. So now coming to the research report. So since we have this space analysis, we know mobility is something that affects most developing countries, if not all. And it's something that most developing countries have incorporated into their NAP. So the question we wanted to explore is how does this actually look when we go below the national level? So as adaptation in general, human mobility is very context specific. It depends on a lot of geographic, environmental, socio-cultural, economic characteristics. And to really address it, it has to be through local or specific action. So the question is, how do NAPs account for that? How is this kind of brought down to the subnational and local level from the National Adaptation Plan? And we have the report that we're launching today, which explores this question, looking at all the NAPs submitted to the UNFCCC by developing countries, and what kind of provisions they have in trying to create a typology of different actions in these NAPs. And then also going deeper into 3 case studies, which are Costa Rica, Senegal, and Sri Lanka. And we're going to hear more on these also from representatives from Senegal and Sri Lanka. To kind of see what does it look like in action and in concrete terms. And this report, the link was already shared in the chat. Maybe we can share it again, since I think more people joined now. Yeah, thank you very much. It's available as of today, and we can access it. Next slide, please. I think we can skip this one since Mauricio already gave a very good overview of the different levels, but we are looking at the national level and the subnational and local level and going down to the community and even household level. So as we already established, most NAPs refer to localization or like vertical integration, and most NAPs refer to mobility. There's also a big overlap. The vast majority of NAPs has some kind of reference to localization of adaptation actions that are relevant to human mobility, although not necessarily concretely only on human mobility. Mostly this is related to planning as an identified need or in relation to already implemented activities, but that's like a very small percentage. Yeah, you can see the numbers here, but basically we looked at different ways in which this is included in the NAPs. I think more interesting than that is looking at the different types of actions that we have in the national adaptation plans submitted so far. Next slide, please. And we have tried to create a typology of these different actions or considerations that the NAPs have included when it comes to localization and human mobility. So basically, these are related to local level planning, to local and subnational actors, to coordination across governance levels, and then also to sectoral implementation, which is not necessarily across governance levels, but it's more a horizontal kind of connection. And there's different examples from a range of different countries, and we have tried to group these. So the first group is kind of localizing the actions that are in the NAP to the subnational level. So some example of this would be, for example, looking at integrating human mobility into subnational plans. Fiji, for example, has this. Looking at developing specific plans for the local level, like municipal adaptation plans, but also mainstreaming adaptation activities or targets into, for example, district development plans, into other subnational development plans, or into land management plans, to kind of address mobility directly in this context-specific way. So that is kind of at the planning stage. Then the second group is looking at the actors. So we have the first kind where it's kind of including local actors directly into the NAP process. So, for example, there are some countries that directly engage migrant populations as key stakeholders and decision makers and getting their input directly when the NAP is formulated. Then the second group is building local level capacities, for example, institutional capacities at local authority level, or building, like trying to train communities or other local level stakeholders on adaptation and integrating migrant populations into this training, or also things like strengthening knowledge management and availability of data on needs and challenges and possible interventions at the subnational level. And then the third one is strengthening subnational and local leadership for NAP implementation, which is different than the first one because it's kind of taking the local and subnational actors and giving them the lead for implementation at the subnational level. So not including like different from having them giving their inputs into the NAP development. It's more about the implementation of these actions when it comes down to the local and subnational level and making sure that there's local leadership, especially when it comes to migration. So that includes then also those who are directly affected, for example, displaced populations, but also those working with migrants or local authorities who have a lot of migrants coming into their, for example, municipalities, or a lot of out-migration from rural areas. And then group C of considerations is either looking at the governance connections, but also already mentioned as vertical integration, for example, through different commissions or different ways to have this integration. Then information flows, that could be information flowing from the local level to the national one, but also kind of localizing information from the national adaptation plan, making it context specific, translating it into local languages or into the local processes that are needed. And then finance flows, which are key to actually implementing any adaptation actions, and making sure that they reach, for example, migrants and can protect their livelihoods. Or in some cases, we have also seen risk transfer insurance mechanisms for displaced communities or for high-risk communities. And then the last group of considerations is about sectoral implementation and especially looking at cross-cutting approaches between the different sectors that are relevant for migration, displacement, or relocation, such as land use, labor, agriculture, health, and making these connections. And again, here we also have countries that include migrant populations as key stakeholders and decision makers, such as Papua New Guinea, for example. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, this was the global analysis. So you can read the report and go into more detail. I can't go into all the details that we have found, but it kind of provides a breakdown of these types of considerations that we have found in the National Adaptation Plan submitted. And then we went to the country level to kind of get a better picture of what it looked like in action. So we looked at Costa Rica, where we had 2 workshops at the very local level, one with communities and one with local authorities at the canton level, like kind of the like a low district level. And my colleague Cristobal will expand a bit more on that. Where issues were often related to relocation due to sea level rise and coastal erosion, but also a number of other issues. Then in Senegal, we had a workshop at the national level, but also looking at the connection between the national level and the subnational stakeholders, especially the municipal ones. And we'll have Gabriel Piandiaye from Senegal, who will talk on this more in the panel. And then in Sri Lanka, we looked specifically at the national level and then the provincial level, because Sri Lanka in its SNAP has committed to develop provincial adaptation plans for each of Sri Lanka's 9 provinces. And we wanted to explore how human mobility is or could be incorporated into these, because the different provinces have different needs and different mobility scenarios. So coastal provinces, for example, have very different needs than those in the hill areas, where a lot of relocation is happening due to landslides. And these risks in coastal areas, it's more related to the coastal erosion and flooding. And then there's a lot of migration also going from agricultural areas to urban areas in seasonal and cyclical patterns from some of the, for example, the North Central province or the Eastern province. And we have Mr. Ledrandeni, who will also give some more insights on the Sri Lanka country context. So I don't want to talk too much about these 3 country case studies. You can check out the report, which has detailed sections on each of these, and we're hoping to also make them available as kind of standalone publications coming out of this main one. But I leave that to the country representatives to speak on these, and to Christopher, my colleague. Next slide, please. And then finally, I don't want to go too much over time also, but what we got out of this research, the analysis, in addition to the global analysis and the country case studies, we also interviewed a broad range of experts working on migration from different institutions, civil society, IOM, other UN entities, academia, researchers, who are working on mobility and localization to kind of get their viewpoints. And we combined this with the findings we had from the country case studies and the submitted NAPs to identify some recommendations. And these are some examples of these recommendations. It's not a comprehensive list, but the report has a full list. So one is for national actors to kind of strengthen the coordination and exchange mechanism between them and the subnational actors, and to have for that common frameworks for mobility. So to make sure that there's a common understanding of what we mean when we talk about climate-related mobility, that data is collected in a way that is compatible across these levels, that, for example, if there are indicators or guidelines, that they align, and if definitions are used for migration or displacement or relocation, that these are uniform across the different levels, but made context-specific, of course, as needed. Then also to look at the existing subnational local plans that are already related to mobility. If they are there for migration, that's great, but sometimes, for example, in urban development plans, in municipal planning, there are relevant considerations. So to use these to inform the development of the NAP or the review of the NAP or iterations of the NAP. Then also to use this as a way to build capacities on human mobility, to kind of create more awareness for this as an adaptation issue and not just loss and damage, and to kind of identify these interconnected policy areas where adaptation connects with other sectors that might not have been so prominent for some of the adaptation planning. And then to identify who are the subnational actors who are working on this and creating partnerships that go across these governance levels, but also across different stakeholder groups. So include government, but also civil society, communities, maybe local private sector, local authorities, researchers, academia, practitioners, the whole range of actors working on this nexus. And also one recommendation that came up is looking at adaptation planning, which is often long-term to address mobility connected to slow onset processes like sea level rise or soil degradation that results in reduced agricultural productivity and thereby then livelihood losses, and that leads to migration. And then again, just to highlight this, I think it's an issue we are all aware of, but there is a need for more direct access to finance and support, especially at the subnational and local level. It's often very difficult for local stakeholders to access this support to address mobility. And that is an area that was often highlighted as something, as a key recommendation. Next slide, please. Similarly, we looked also from the subnational and local perspective. Some of these are the same, looking again at coordination, information flows, the need for access to finance. But then also the local level actors would look into developing local needs assessments and catalogs of possible interventions that can then inform the NAP process. And perhaps also to build on existing structures. So in some countries, we found that there's already very localized and integrated structures, for example, for disaster management or disaster preparedness that go from the national to the local level with different stages that are very interconnected. So maybe building on this and mainstreaming adaptation and mobility considerations into this would be opportunity to effectively address this. And then local participation mechanisms, including migrants, displaced people, those who are being relocated or those that are planned to be relocated, and making sure that the NAP provisions are translated into the local context and language, so understandable and usable for local stakeholders. Because often the NAP actions are relatively high level and relatively abstract. They're connected to maybe the UNFCCC process and the UNFCCC language, which might not necessarily connect to what's going on at the local level and how local stakeholders would need to understand these to actually be able to address mobility, either as adaptation strategy or to at least avoid negative impacts on communities. And next slide. With that, again, this is not a comprehensive breakdown of the whole report. I just wanted to highlight some of the key insights and the key takeaways from that. So just maybe 4 key takeaways, and then I will stop and happy to answer any questions, and please check out the report for more information. So one, climate-related mobility can be adaptation, but it can also be loss and damage. There's a complex nexus there, and there are very different forms of mobility in different situations, and to address them needs to be context specific. It needs to be addressed at the subnational and local level because it's so different based on the different context, and this needs to be kind of considered when plans are developed and when actions are being designed and implemented. There are a lot of challenges when it comes to the integration into between the national and subnational level, for example, administrative coordination, the different definitions, the lack of comprehensive data and research, there are often large data and knowledge gaps. There's a lack of means of implementation, including finance, but also capacity building. And then the engagement with local actors is often incomplete. There's a need to maybe enhance these mechanisms where local actors directly can interact with the national process, and also priority setting between national and subnational level. But it also presents an opportunity to really scale up effective action on new mobility, because new mobility is really a cross-cutting issue. It's an issue that is affecting almost all countries. And if these national, subnational linkages can be strengthened, it's really opportunity to scale up effective action, not only to address loss and damage, but also to make mobility into something where possible, where it supports adaptation and where those who are moving are both protected, but also having the opportunities to actually get positive things out of it, who derive benefits through remittances, through exchange, through getting knowledge and connections, or by closer integrating rural and urban areas and having this kind of connection between them as a livelihood diversification strategy or as a risk mitigation strategy to really help communities and regions to adapt. And yeah, that's it from my side as a brief presentation. Thank you very much. And again, happy to discuss, but I'm also looking forward to the interventions from Cristobal to add on, but also from the two country representatives. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Dennis. And yeah, I can just repeat what you said. I think also for us, it was a great learning experience, this joint cooperation. And I think one thing that stood out for me is really that it's a great endeavor and really not trivial to try to do both, to integrate something so cross-sectoral and cross-cutting as human mobility, as you mentioned, that can be both a positive adaptation measure, but also highlight quite a lot of challenges and risks, and at the same time implement adaptation into different levels of governance down to the local level and from the local level up. So yeah, congrats again to the research, because I think we spend a lot of time thinking about how to even put this into a framework. And I really like what you said at the end, that despite the challenges, that can also actually be an opportunity, given that human mobility is so cross-cutting, that it then can also reach many different stakeholders and bring together more cooperation on adaptation in general. So thank you so much for the presentation. And I think we can hold back a little bit the Q&A. I've seen a few we tried to answer in the chat, but we can also expand on that. And I've seen that Lili Landini was able to join us now, so I would be very happy to introduce you again as our first guest speaker, and someone who was very much active in the case study research as well. So Mr. Lili Landini, the director of the Climate Change Secretariat of the Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka, and who's the operational focal point to the UNFCCC. Thank you so much for joining. And it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about where Sri Lanka stands in its adaptation process, because I know that there's a lot of progress going on. And if you could shed some light on a few concrete examples how Sri Lanka is addressing human mobility and local adaptation planning. Mr. Lili Landini, floor is yours. You're currently on mute. I'm not sure if that's something we can change. Now, maybe it might work. No. Mr. Landini, can you hear us? Yes, you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. Maybe if you try to log out and come in again, and we start with Mr. Gabriel, would that work? Yes, let's do that. Let's flip it and hear from Senegal first. Thank you so much again, Gabriel, for joining. I introduced you already, but just to say that Senegal's GCF NAP Readiness Project Coordinator and NAP Technical Specialist, Mr. Gabriel Pierre Ndaye, he's here today. You were also very much active in the workshops in Senegal and contributed to this research. So yeah, we're very happy to have you. And yes, could you tell us a little bit where Senegal stands in its adaptation process and how the country is tackling localization of adaptation measures, as well as the human mobility challenges that you experience?
Okay, hello Katarina, hello everyone. Thank you for invitation. I'm very happy to be in this panel. I think it's a thematic very important for us. Okay, in Senegal, I think we launched our process in 2015, and we have chosen 10 sectors priorities to elaborate our national adaptation plan. And in this case, we have elaborate actually currently 6 NAP for agriculture, fishery, coastal zone, road infrastructure, health, and flooding. And we with the NAP GCF, with the NAP JEF, but with the NAP GCF, we have to elaborate the NAP for biodiversity, livestock, water resources, and tourism. And after the formulation of 10 sectors, we will aggregate it and elaborate our national adaptation plan, our global national adaptation plan. We will take account all these 10 sectors and the cross-cutting of the sector. And for the question of human mobility, you will see, unfortunately, the NAP, sectoral NAP we have elaborated, just we have only the coastal zone NAP who have few mention the question of what we call that, the planned relocation, but we haven't good today to have the data to see what is the implication of climate change in human mobility. I think we need more data to explain the relation of this confirmation or affirmation. But an example I can share for you, an case we have in Saint-Louis. Saint-Louis is a region of Senegal, who is located in the north of Senegal. Saint-Louis is a historic coastal city, increasing vulnerable to flooding and erosion. And the impact of climate change are both acute and multifaceted. And the city, if you see it, is located at the mouth of the Senegal River and facing the Atlantic Ocean. And it is the region is most exposed in urban area in Senegal to climate hazard, and particularly sea level rise, coastal erosion, and extreme flooding. And we had an experience in this region with a village whose name is Ketna, who is located in the land of Barbary, was confronted when the bridge in 2023 has been recurring storm. Unfortunately, we had many hundreds of homes have been destroyed with the storms. And this problem has forcing the displacement of more than 1,500 people between 2017 and 2022, with some estimated of several thousand displaced since the bridge opened. And I say it was many displaced families who have been relocated to camps or new settlements inland. And for this problem, the government of Senegal have been supported by the World Bank to launch several initiatives to strengthen urban and coastal resilience. For example, we have one of the projects funded by the World Bank, who name it Stormwater Management and Climate Change Adaptation, who have been launched in Saint-Louis to try to resolve this problem of destruction of the home and to reduce the displacement for the population who live it in the place, if I can say that. And for example, the result of this project, we have, for example, some adaptation measure who have been put in place in this locality. We have, for example, nature-based infrastructure with green corridors and mangrove restoration who have been done to mitigate the coastal erosion who leaving the population. And this measure have permitted to reduce the forced displacement in high-risk area like the Lang of Barbary, who is a Getna. And this measure protected 15,000 residents have been preserved, and 200 hectares of land have been preserved with the intervention of this project. The second thing who worked well was the community-led relocation. After severe floods we had in 2020, in 2024, the local authorities collaborated with the residents to relocate 500 families from floodplains to safer zone. And the government have using the participatory mapping to ensure transparency. The third option they do this is what we call the livelihood diversification, because the project have integrated climate-smart agriculture training for displacing communities, because all for the communities they were doing fisheries. Yes, they are more of the population were the fisher. They do fishing for their job, but the project would like to help them to do diversification for activities, to help them to do reconversion. Don't know if it's good said in English. And this activities permit to enabling 1,200 households to transition from flood-dependent farming to resilient practice like salt-tolerant crop cultivation. And other work well done was the community engagement. The project have established local committees and intercommunal association to ensure participatory planting and management of adaptation measure, integrating local knowledge and priorities. But when we have something good, we had also challenges the intervention faced. The first challenge was the limited funding scale. You know, for example, the project for project in French is a stormwater water resources management. With the World Bank has funded $155 million for investment. But unfortunately, the project has covered only 30% for adaptation needs and leaving gaps in housing and infrastructure for displaced population. It was the first challenge we faced it, the project have faced it. The second challenge was the equity gaps, with the resettlement plan often excluding informal settlements, exacerbating inequalities For example, if you see, for example, we have a female headed household, 35% affected families facing barrier to accessing relocation support due to land tenure biases. It was the second challenge. The first challenge was the what you call that, the coordination fragmentation. In, for example, the overlapping mandates between the Ministry of Environment and local governments. Have been some problems we noted on that, because in the project implementation, you will see, for example, 20% for activities who has been planned was postponed due to bureaucratic hurdles. The other challenge we faced evidently was the data gaps. I say that when I started, it was a very challenge we have on that, with the lack of granular data on climate migration patterns, hindered targeted intervention. We had only 12% of mobility decision in Saint Louis were tracked in national database, limiting adaptive planning. And I think it will be a challenge for us. I think it's a very, let's say, well, it is a big challenge to have to do. It's why in the project we're coordinating actually in linking national adaptation plan, national and subnational adaptation plan. The more important we will do is to collect data for impact of climate change in climate mobility. We will integrate it in the vulnerability studies to have data and to see how to have data to integrate it in the NAP. And we think we will collaborate with the International Organization of Migration, or maybe SLAC and Trust, to help us to use tools or methodology to see how to integrate it in the formulation of all the NAP. But in the first thing we have to do is in the vulnerability studies to have data, necessary data to permit us to planify our adaptation. Yes, I think for the answer for the question, this was some answer I will have to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ndaya, and I think it was great that you shared all these very specific examples of the localities, and also the width of, as you said, both opportunities or attempts that work well, like nester-based solutions and other adaptation measures to prevent forced mobility, forced migration, but also some attempts to use participatory methods to use mobility as an adaptation strategy. So thank you so much for this really rich insight into Senegal's adaptation process. I would like to try again with Mr. Lil Randini. Maybe there was also a message that maybe the connection with the earphones was the problem. Mr. Lil Randini, can you hear us?
Yeah,
right.
now connected.
Now we can hear you as well. Super. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. We know you're very busy in between meetings, but we're very happy to have you. And it would be great if you could give us some insight into Sri Lanka's adaptation journey, where you stand, and maybe also share some concrete examples on how you're dealing with youth mobility in your country. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Katrina. Yes, really, we are, as you know, we are living in the tropics. We are surrounded by the sea, and we get rainfall from monsoon, and our country's more than 80% of the Sri Lanka land is biodiverse, highly biodiversity hotspot. We are sharing the borders with the Western Ghats region. So likewise, our endemism and all those things are there. So we are one of a unique country ecosystem in the tropics. So adaptation is very much important. Agriculture is our primary livelihood, and we have given more priority for food security, health, our ecosystems, and incomes and everything that we can get from the benefits from tourism, water sector, and all those things. Almost all the 13 sectors are there in the national adaptation plans. Nowadays, we are undergoing through the second revision. That report will be very soon and validated and submitted for the public and the UNFCCC. So there are 13 sectors. First sector is food security, and food security entails three different subsectors: fisheries, agriculture, and livestock. So we have, I mean, well before signing Paris Agreement in 2016, we were having a national adaptation strategy. So that was prepared in somewhere around 2011, and it was effective until the Paris Agreement. But then, after becoming a party to Paris Agreement, so we formally entered into the national adaptation planning process. So, first national adaptation plan was still effective. That is to be that was the replenishment span for 2017 to 2024. So we are preparing the second one. So there are 13 sectors. We have given, we have a separate chapter called uh, loss and damage. We have, I mean, well in advance, we have included loss and damage into our NDCs and the national adaptation plans also. So, in that, especially climate-induced migration, climate-related migration, we have identified the requirement for government intervention and the institutional interventions and the governance. We have to integrate those concerns into our governance structures and the institutional framework, and we have to have the measures so that we can apply to reduce the bad impacts. I mean, the not bad impacts of migration, but there are some good impacts also. But I will discuss very briefly on that. So we have identified and we have included it. Another thing is that we have devolved our national adaptation actions into sub-national levels. We have 9 provinces. 9 provinces. We have prepared 9 provincial adaptation plans aligned with the national adaptation plan. So, as Dennis also mentioned, we have, I mean, we are, although we are not a very big country, our diversity is very high and our vulnerability diversity is also very high. Our central highland is vulnerable, having I mean, the earth slips and the mud flats and some all those lot of different things when heavy rainy seasons and the roads are blocked and all those things are happening. Central highlands are most of the vegetable growing areas. Substantial number of farmers are engaged in vegetable cultivation. Most of the temperate vegetables like cabbage and all those things, carrots and all those things, then they are having problems due to heavy rainy seasons, and we have highly erosive soils. So this is a big issue. And at the same time, our coastal belt is very long. So our coastal regions are vulnerable to sea level rise. It was identified, it was proved that the sea level rise affects and the coastal erosion, and at the same time salt water intrusion through our river outlets. So that has a great bad impact for our water supply and all those things. So central highlands are subjected to, because of the climate change of the fog interception is one of a way that we get precipitation, and some of the fauna and flora are endemic ones also are inhabited in those areas. So what happened with the increasing climate change, fog interception and all those cloud forests are diminishing. So they some of the species who cannot migrate into downstream forest areas, though, so they are extinct. So those are some of the problems. And the dry zone is bad slow onset event now undergo through prevalent droughts. That is a big thing, that because our agriculture rice production, our staple food is there in the dry zone. And the wet zone is flooding. Most of the biggest rivers are flown from the central highlands, goes to the sea through our wet zone districts. Our capital Colombo is also in the wet zone. So a lot of problems are there because of the floods. So what happened is that the migration is associated with these climate changes. But as we are not a very big land mass like India or Africa, but what happened is that we have done assessment reports in 2023 with the support from UN Migration. It also identified, but there are some climate-induced migration things are happening, but most of the things are indirect impacts are coming from climate change. And the rural people, mainly rural areas, are hit by poverty in most of these areas because of the infrastructure problems and the education and other issues. Their incomes are lower, and what happened is that they compelled to migrate into the urban areas. Suppose one of a great problem nowadays we have internalize those things into our NDCs and the national adaptation plans. Mainly, those were given a big significance and the concern in provincial adaptation plans. You see the wildlife human conflicts. So the elephants and the monkeys, porcupines, and the squirrels and the wild boars, they are encroaching the farmlands. Mainly for the it is evident that the elephants are invading homelands, and they devastate the crops in the dry periods because of they are coming in search of water which are not available in the forest area. So what happened is that we have altered our habitats, and so they come to the rural areas and the homestead though, and the lives are also lost because of the elephant attack. So what happened is that because of the insecurity feeling, uh, those who are possible to migrate into urban areas much safer, they tend to then they find good schools for their children and all. Likewise, there are some signs of there, but not very much proven with the objective research. So that is one of a great challenge that we need to know. These things were identified, and to the extent identified, we have internalized mainly to the provincial adaptation plans. So the second one is that we have established the provincial adaptation boards that is being chaired by provincial climate board, chaired by the provincial chief secretary, and there is a subordinate officials who are there in the provincial climate units. So provincial climate units are the implementation arm. So they go to the grassroots level, work very closely with the community, and decision making happen with the leadership of the provincial chief secretary and other provincial institutional heads of different sector things, forest department, wildlife department, coast conservation department, likewise, so on and so forth. So recently, what is one of our intervention is that to go for local adaptation plans. There is a project called Adaptation for Resilience project that is funded by the Adaptation Fund, and it is a regional project. We are implementing that project jointly with India. India, there are 3 provinces selected, and there are 6 dry zone, 6 dry zone districts were identified where prolonged drought happened, and the farmers are suffering from shortage of water, and their paddy production and other field crops production is affected. So local adaptation plans, there are more than 150 local adaptation plans are produced as the requirement for the ADAPT 4R project. ADAPT 4R project, 4 means adaptation for resilience. Main objective of that project is to provide a well-tuned, tailored, focused, last mile climate information to the needy farmers, and at the same time co-produce these climate information with a meaningful anticipatory action, so that they can reduce and they can well judge the time of planting and the crop selection, and they can successfully face the climate vulnerability. So we are going to empower farmers by local adaptation planning, that is, those have been prepared by the participatory methods, employing the participatory mapping, cross-sectional visits, and all those things. We are going to identify the root causes of urban migration or migration into other areas. Are there any climate significance on those things to identify? One major important thing is that to identify their own solution. What were the solutions were sustainable? What happened that now they are not accustomed to apply those things, but in the past those were very much important, because these forest wildlife crop damages and everything were became so prevalent with the recent 20-30 years time. But in the past, I mean, there were nice coexistence, the elephants and the human beings very harmoniously live in the rural areas. Yeah, they shared the forest, they shared the homestead areas also, but the incidences are very minimal. But what happened is that the haphazard, unplanned development and everything, people happen to migrate from rural areas and urban. And livelihood related seasonal migration is also there. We have identified because of the eastern coast and the northwestern coast, fishermen are migrating because of the there are some seasons because of the climate change, fish stocks are diminishing. So what happened? The fishermen are seasonally migrate. That is more of a custom. So that is also identified. But custom has converted very bad situation because of the climate change impact. So my final thing is that we need more evidences. Things were identified. Not with a good, but researchers are going on with the cycle and trust, and some other UN migration and some other organizations are concerned on this, and they are doing some research to prove real climate induced migration and to strengthen our national adaptation plan, provincial adaptation plan, local adaptation plan actions, and tune so that we can enhance the resilience of our community, so that they will live happily, and we also will be very happy that we think that we have accomplished our targets, our tasks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Randeni, and thank you so much for sharing these, again, very different examples. I really like that you pointed out how challenging it is to assess whether the rural to urban migration has adaptive benefits, which it has in some cases, but then comes with its own challenges. And also, I think, thank you so much for flagging that climate impacts do not only affect human mobility, but also biodiversity and wildlife mobility, which I think is something that we don't look at so much. The time is fast advancing. Before I would like to open it up to some Q&A, I'd like to give our colleague Cristobal from Slack and Trust Program Officer also a chance to share a bit of insights from Costa Rica, as you've been much involved there. Maybe quite concretely, if you could share one takeaway from the case study there on how Costa Rica addresses human mobility at the local level, and what works well and what is more challenging.
All right, I hope you can hear me. So yes, in the case of Costa Rica, where we tried to work on was in this municipality called Esparza, which is located in the Pacific coast. And more concretely, we had worked or reviewed this problematic in the part of Caldera and Tivives beaches. And as Dennis was mentioning before, yeah, the most, let's say, recurrent aspect here was the part of the periodic displacement that families were having due to storm surges that have been like more intense in recent years, being mostly in 2012 and 2023. So there has been this like increasing impacts of storm surges in these areas. And these surges also affect a national route that has a really important connectivity aspect, national and internationally, for the transfer of goods, transportation, commerce, and tourism. So here the important part is like the disaster risk management aspect in the sense of planned relocation and disaster displacement that is going on currently in these communities. And the thing here is like what has been working well is like people are being organized. They have these local emergency committees that are that have started already, because this was not done before. And in this sense, Tivives Beach local emergency committee, they have been like working more in this early warning system, and also related to tsunamis. And what they have worked is in trying to involve much of the community, and also targeting youth to attend workshops and also tsunami drills. So this is something that is really important in these communities, in this part of the storm surges, and well, preparing for a probable, or hopefully not, but a tsunami that could happen. So that's something that is working on, and that is also transpassing to the Caldera Beach communities. And the other thing that is been going on, and it's like been working in this sense, is the monitoring at the local level. Between the local emergency committee and also the municipality of Esparza. So what they're doing now is like having an internal census where you can see the people that are living in these risk zones. So the procedure, evacuation procedure, is done like in a better way in case of these storm surges that are being increasing basically. And in the part of challenges, the most common ones, or yeah, the most pressing ones are being related to the people in the community that are in this vulnerable situation, that are not aware of the current legislation in terms of land use. So in this sense, this is something that the municipality is working on already. So to have this well established, and that people know, and that there is not this kind of informal settlements that are going on. And also when we have this relocation, the planned relocation going on, in some cases we have families that will just relocate for 3 months, and they will come back to the same vulnerable flood prone areas. So yeah, that's another thing that is also being working the municipality, and also these local emergency committees, to have this improved in this sense, because there's this families are rooted to these places, even if they know that they have this danger going on with storm surges, they still want to live there, or otherwise they will try to find a new location, but we have the same similar issues. So I think in this sense, this will be like the main challenges for the Esparza municipality and also the local emergency committee to address this issue with some part of the community that lives in these flood-prone areas due to storm surges. And I think I will leave it up to here, so I can have there's some time for participants that have attended, that they can also ask us everyone. So back to you, Katarina.
Great, thank you so much, Cristobal, and thank you as well for flagging. I think that was also one of the key findings from this report, that much of the good practices that exist on addressing new mobility and that could be leveraged for adaptation comes actually from local disaster risk reduction structures and the local committees that you mentioned are one example. So thank you so much. And yes, so we'd like to leave or use the last good remaining 10 minutes to open the conversation to you. We have a few questions in the chat, and one that I think is, goes directly to the heart of the matter. The question from Aram Rodriguez, I'm happy to read it out, but you can also unmute yourself and ask it to a specific panelist. Otherwise, I'll have to put somebody on the spot. But the question is, could you please explain a little more why it is mentioned that migration is a form of adaptation, taking into account that if someone migrates, it is a survival measure and indicates that the adaptation was not effective and there was not adaptation at all. Who would like to take that question? Maybe Dennis, do you want to come in on that, as you've also mentioned the relation to loss and damage, which I think is quite related to this question.
Yes, sure. I would be happy to come in on this. And I think it's a very good question because it kind of, as you say, it cuts to the heart of what we are discussing. So I would maybe disagree with that migration is automatically a survival response, because there are a lot of different reasons why people migrate. But often, of course, the ones we focus on in the research and addressing are the ones where it is where they don't see another option, or where it is kind of a survival response. What I would say, what we want to highlight is basically that migration doesn't necessarily need to be separate from adaptation measures. So it can be part of an overall adaptation strategy by enabling people to kind of be able to be mobile and to move. For example, to access different livelihood opportunities. So we have often the case that people are migrating out of areas where they only have very limited livelihood options, for example, only agricultural livelihood options. And of course, one possibility is to create more livelihood options in these areas, but sometimes that's just not possible or viable due to either soft or hard limits. And in that case, it can be beneficial for them to be able to move to other areas to access these livelihoods and diversify the overall economy of this area. Similarly, I think there are questions of habitability that at some point we will have to address, where areas might not be habitable in the future, and where migration or relocation might be things that need to be considered. And in that case, also, it can be part of our overall adaptation strategy, where it is ensured that those who are moving are doing it in a way that preserves their agency, their dignity, and allows them to continue the same kind of standard of living, the same way of life, the same access to resources. So I would just say it's a very definitely migration or mobility is not automatically adaptation. It's also not automatically loss and damage. It's a broad spectrum in between, and it can be either depending on the context and situation. In many cases, we want to avoid migration, but it's not always the case, and it can definitely also be part of a beneficial adaptation strategy. And in many cases, people want to move, but are not able to move because they do not have the capacities, connections, resources, infrastructure that would allow them to move. And in those cases, also, one part of adaptation strategy can be to give them the mobility that they want to actually be able to explore these as opportunities. So yeah, maybe that in a nutshell.
Great, thank you so much, Dennis. Does anyone from the panel would like to add something? Otherwise, I think...
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead, Gabriel.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think Mr. Dennis has a very good answer to the question. But if I can comfort of that, it is migration is a form of adaptation when it helps people to reduce risk and improve well-being in the face of climate change. But migration is also a sign of adaptation limits. When people have no choice but to move, it shows that local adaptation failed or was not possible. But it's why I think it's very important to clarify the concept. Not understand when you formulate the NAP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriel. We have another question from Joyce Takandisa, who asks, given that each year climate change impacts continue to increase, leading to higher levels of displacement and migration, what is the status of climate migrants vis-à-vis legal recognition? Do we need a new legal framework that recognizes climate migrants? who would like to speak to that question? Or maybe also Joyce, you would like to take the floor and ask and clarify. I assume legal framework. Do you refer to a refugee convention, or what kind of legal framework do you mean, if at all?
Thank you. I think what I just meant to understand from the participants that are here today is just to get the different views. I've seen often there's an argument about whether they need to be legally recognized on the same footing as the refugees covered under the 1951 Refugee Convention. So that was the framing of my question, to understand if at all it is as easy as that. Do we need an expansion of that framework? Do we need completely new frameworks? Thank you.
Great, thank you. And maybe that question can be coupled with another question in the chat. If well, the NAP Global Network, or maybe in general, if there's a universal working definition of climate mobility, or are national governments left to define this relationship themselves? Can just say that we as a NAP Global Network do not have a universal working definition, but maybe that is a good question together with the different frameworks on climate migrants versus the legal status. So is somebody from the panel wanting to talk to that?
I mean, yeah, please.
Come in, Dennis.
No, I just want to say I'm not a lawyer, so I'm always a bit wary to weigh in on the legal aspects of this. I think this is something that has been discussed quite a lot, and I think there are pros and cons for looking at like a legal status. And I think it's important to highlight that in the discussion around this, we often kind of conflate different kinds of categories, like refugees, migrants, displaced persons. Some are like just descriptive categories, others are actually tied to specific rights and also state obligations. I've heard different answers to this from the lawyers, if it's a good idea to do this, to look at this legal status for climate refugees or not. There's also potentially danger of, I guess, opening up the refugee convention at all, because then also other things in the convention might be kind of put into question. So I would leave this question to the lawyers, but from the ground realities at the moment, we don't have a legal status, and the protections given to migrants and also things like registration and recognition are very varying based on regions and countries, which again highlights why it's important to address these things in a very context-specific way and look at the exact context and the existing regional frameworks, for example, that allow free movement or don't allow free movement, and what are the barriers also for movement within and between countries.
Great, thanks, Dennis. And maybe to add to the frameworks, also to other international institutions that help countries to build climate mobility into their NAPs, there's the International Organization for Migration that has already been mentioned by the colleagues from Senegal, that is quite active in supporting countries. And they have also, together with the WIM-EXCOM, just last year produced a big report as supplementary guidance for the NAP development that includes a range of different mobility dimensions and categories. So that might also be of interest to consult for that question. I see that Joseph Nyama has his hand up. Maybe would you like to come in with a question?
Yes, thank you, Katrina, for the opportunity. My name is Joseph Yama, and I'm a final year doctoral researcher with Radboud University Nijmegen, and I'm working on climate change and migration mobility nexus. I want to first comment on the question from one of us regarding the legal framework. I think the challenge from my research finding is trying to make climate mobility inclusive, but also politically acceptable across context. And this has become an issue with finding or accepting a legal framework that supports people displaced in the context of climate change. But one thing I think we should also keep in mind is that climate change impact have also changed the course of mobility. And so therefore, this conversation is not something that policymakers and researchers also need to shy away from. We need to engage it, and maybe not just for the lawyers alone. But I have, moving on, I have two questions. First is to the NAPS presentation, but also anybody can respond to it. I noticed from my research that there is a gap between what happens at the national, subnational, and at the local communities. So first question is, what are the ongoing efforts between some of these organizations and presentation we have now to ensure that whatever decisions that are discussed or agreed at the national level trickles down to the community, to those at the front line? That is one question on that. And then the second one is, I noticed that when you do empirical research with these communities that are displaced, you realize that most of these people don't even know what NAPS is. So that leads me to my question now. How does some of these organizations and also other platforms that have presented, how do they include empirical researches that reflect local voices in their policy reports in order to capture the realities of people exposed to this climate impact, the frontline communities? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And I know we are at the time, so I'd like to still give the opportunity to the panel to answer to these two questions. And then, unfortunately, we have to wrap up. Mauricio, do you want to take that first question on how does the NAP from the national level trickle down to the local level? And then maybe somebody from the panelists can speak to how the local actors are engaged in NAP formulation.
Thank you very much, Katarina, and thank you for this really good question. Indeed, there is a gap that has been identified between the national level and the subnational level planning. For example, the Adaptation Gap report identified that around 50% of NAP documents, of NAP processes could strengthen their integration of adaptation at subnational levels. And this is something that the NAPGROW network and other organizations are actively supporting from the national level to the subnational levels, but also from the local levels to the subnational and the national level. It goes both ways. And maybe just to mention briefly that many countries have created their own mechanisms for consultation when they build their national policies, including the national adaptation plans. And this is something that we're further exploring as well. So I'll leave it there in the interest of time. Thank you, Katarina.
Great. Thank you so much, Mauricio. And maybe last words, does Mr. Lille or Gabriel want to share how to involve communities at the front line who might not be aware of the NAP process or have heard the NAP never in their life before?
Okay, thank you. I will maybe answer if yes. In Senegal, for example, with the formulation of our NAP, we integrate the local community, because in our governance we have what we call regional committee on climate change, who is based in our 14 region, and in the COMREC or regional committee, we have local committee and others beneficiary who are in this committee, and they participate on the formulation with the capacity building. They will be actor on the vulnerability studies and other thing. And we have put in place this committee is to put the consideration or the priority of these local committees to integrate it in the formulation of our NAP. And we have done that in others NAP we have elaborated before, with agriculture or agriculture, road infrastructure, health. All the formulation have implicated the local committee. Okay, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gabriel. And thank you so much for the audience for all your questions. Apologies that we weren't able to address all of them, but as said, we will share the recordings and our contact details for follow-up, and we would be very happy to stay engaged on this topic. And yes, hope you'll read the full report and hope to see you soon. Thank you again for all the guest speakers and presenters, and thank you so much for joining up until now. Have a good and wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.